On today's show, I have 10 bats the New York Mets could pursue at the trade deadline.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You could also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work, the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code, all in lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So what do the New York Mets need to add at the trade deadline? We're going to be talking a lot about that over the next couple of days. I think there is a clear need that we all know. That is adding to the bullpen. We're going to talk about that on tomorrow's show. But when it comes to the lineup and the bench potentially, what do the Mets need when it comes to bats? Or do they need any bats? So let's first look at what is in place right now. Francisco Lindor, everyday shortstop. Brandon Nimmo going to play near every day in left or center. JD Martinez, Pete Alonso, Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez. Those guys, that six, you're not touching that. Jose Iglesias, I believe, is good enough to be the starting second baseman for the rest of this season, especially when you have Jeff McNeil as an alternative. Not to mention, if that doesn't work as a fallback, you got Luis Angel Acuna, who could potentially force the Mets into a promotion at some point down the stretch. You even have Luke Ritter as an option. So I don't think that second base is a priority. If you can get someone that can play second base in a corner outfield spot like Jeff McNeil, but with a better bat, that could be an option. You have Harrison Bader, who should be your center fielder. Tyrone Taylor as his backup. Starling Marte is the big question mark for this team, and that is where we're going to look here when it comes to a bat that the Mets might need to add here. Because if they have Marte back, you have that lineup that we just talked about. Lindor, Nimmo, JD Martinez, Alonso, Vientos, Alvarez, Iglesias, Bader, Marte. And then you have a bench of Jeff McNeil, Tyrone Taylor, Luis Torrens, and then there's one more bench spot. If you knew right now that Starling Marte was going to be ready on August 1st and healthy the rest of the year, you can make the case the Mets shouldn't even make a trade because they could just roll with whoever in that final bench spot. Maybe it's Brett Beatty to get a good left-handed bat off the bench and another guy that can play some third. Maybe it's DJ Stewart. You want to keep him on the roster. Maybe it's Ben Gamel. Maybe it's Ritter. Maybe it's Acuna. Hey, maybe even Drew Gilbert has an unbelievable first 2 or 3 weeks in Syracuse and just ends up, up in short order. I sort of doubt that, but he is an option on, he's not on the 40 yet, but in the organization. Really, though, you need a right fielder because Starling Marte is in his mid-30s. He's got a knee that is healing slowly, and you just can't count on him for the second half. Hopefully he's back because honestly, as we'll go through the different candidates today, I think you're going to find that Marte is potentially the best possible fit for what this roster needs. And what they need is someone that can play right field, who at least has a strong arm to be out there, that can be a complement to Tyrone Taylor and Harrison Bader when it comes to the fact that those two guys have terrible splits this year, reverse splits. So they are not hitting left-handed pitching. You need someone that can mash against lefties in the outfield. That's what the Mets need at this deadline. Tyrone Taylor has a 512 OPS against left-handed pitching. Harrison Bader has a 577 OPS against left-handed pitching. Against righties, Taylor's got a 750 OPS. Bader has an 813 OPS. So as we go through the different candidates, the archetype we are looking for is someone that can play right field, at least has an arm, if nothing else, similar to Marte, with an ability to hit left-handed pitching. I would say on the defense, be DJ Stewart or better. Okay? So I've broken this down into 3 different types of trades the Mets can target for our 3 segments today. The first one, stunning blockbusters. Second one, in-division trades. Third one, reunions with former Mets. So we're going to start in this first segment with the stunning blockbusters. There's 3 names that jump out to me. Luis Robert, Brent Rooker, and Randy Arozarena. Here's the thing. I don't know if any of these are likely. That's why I call them stunning blockbusters. We'll start with Luis Robert. If you're just strictly talking about fit, which player can make the Mets the best this year, it's Luis Robert. He has superstar potential. We saw it last year when he was finally healthy for a full season. And he's hitting better lately after missing some time again this year due to injury. This is a guy that has only played over 100 games once in his career. That was last season. So there's the injury concern, but the contract is pretty favorable after this year. He has 3 years of team control at $55 million. 26 and 27 are club options. So if he got hurt to the point where he couldn't play after 2025, you could actually get out of the contract, but you want to hang on to him, and that's really good value if he's healthy, which is still a big if, but he could play at an all-star level. He can be a center fielder. You can slide him over to right when you have Bader this year, move him back to center next year. A lot of roster flexibility, but here's the problem. He's going to cost more than the Mets are going to be willing to play, because this guy, if he's moved, is going to be the best player moved to this deadline, at least when it comes to position players. His teammate, Garrett Crochet, might get the most value as a starting pitcher, although there's some concerns with him because he's a reliever being converted, or was converted this year, into a starting pitcher, and he is already blowing his innings through the roof from anything he's ever done in his professional career. So the White Sox are in an interesting position with these two guys where they don't have to trade them. They have control. They can leverage that. They can really, set a price and try to make sure they meet that price. And I just don't see a world where the Mets are going to meet that price for this team, because I don't think that if Luis Robert hit free agency, the Mets would be that all in on him just because of the injury concerns and the fact that they got a roster right now that it is good, but it's not necessarily World Series or bust good. This is still a longer term play. So yes, there's control with Robert, but I just can't see the Mets giving up Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, Brandon Sproat. I don't see them trading any of those guys at this deadline. And it's going to take one of those guys at least to get Robert. So I don't think that one happens. Brent Rooker is probably the best hitter the Mets could add at this deadline, but here's the problem. Doesn't play the outfield well. He's a DH. Now, you could say, all right, sign him this year, stick him in right or stick him in left, and then, moving forward next year, he can be your DH because you're not going to re-sign JD Martinez. That's fine and well, but do you really want to trade considerable assets for a guy that does have control, so he's going to cost a lot of prospects, that doesn't fit your position of need? David Stearns likes defense. That was clear with how they approached this offseason. So I can't see them acquiring Rooker. If it wasn't going to cost a lot of prospects, sure, but the combination of a lot of prospects to acquire plus a bad roster fit, I just don't see it. Yes, he would be awesome just as a bat in the lineup, but I can't envision it. If it happened, be stunning blockbuster, and yes, they would be a better offense, but I really don't like the fit. Here's the one that makes a little bit of sense to me, and that's Randy Arozarena. Okay, so he could become a cult hero. You can envision it. This is a guy that lives for the big moment that I think would thrive on the big stage in New York. It feels Cespedes-like to me. It really does. It feels like that guy that comes in and can just wow you and would love playing in front of a packed house instead of what he's had throughout his career in Tampa. So I think that fit is great. 2 years of control after this season and arbitration eligible. Now, that's a double-edged sword for me, though, because while he is under control, he is a left fielder. Brendan Nimmo, moving forward, is a left fielder. Now, you could slide Nimmo back to center, Arozarena in left after this season. You don't re-sign Harrison Bader. But the Mets have some exciting center field prospects that are coming through the system. Do you want to block them potentially for Arozarena? He's good enough that you could argue that. At the same time, he is not in the middle of his best season. He's in 202 on the year, 309 on base, 362 slug. Does have 12 home runs, 14 stolen bases. His weighted runs created plus, which measures hitters on a league average of 100, is 98. So he has been slightly worse than league average. His OPS is 671. Granted, 3 years prior to this, from 21 through 23, this guy was routinely 20 home runs. He drove an 80 a couple years. 1 year it was high 60s. He crushes lefties. This year, 790 OPS versus lefties. Versus righties, 632 OPS. So that fits. WRC plus 131 versus lefties, 87 versus righties. For his career, 153 WRC plus against lefties. And then against righties, 113, which is still above average. He's pretty much going to give you 20 and 20 every year. And at his absolute best, he could maybe be a 30-30 guy. Hasn't done it yet in his career. He has hit 30 home runs, though. So he's a really good player. He's 29 years old. Here's my issue with it. He's got a weak arm. So, yeah, you could just say, whatever. We don't care about the arm. We're going to stick him in right field, and he's going to play the first 7 innings of the game. But is that what you're going to do for a guy that's supposed to be a star player, where you're going to be subbing him out for defense late? You could. I just don't know. And then it's still going to cost a pretty big return. I like Arozarena the most of these three because he's less injury prone than Robert, and he's cheaper when it comes to the contract. And I think prospect return, it's going to be probably less as well. So there's that side of it because there's 2 years of control beyond this season instead of 3, and probably not the same star profile, probably not the same ceiling as Robert. Robert fits more positionally, but I could see that part of the fit making more sense for Arozarena. Also, you could definitely potentially grab a reliever in that trade as well. I think that's going to be attractive if the Mets were to trade for a bat and have to give up a lot for it. Get a reliever attached in the deal, and the Rays have some arms we'll talk about tomorrow that would fit. He's a better fit than Rooker. Overall, though, I just do not see the Mets pushing the chips in to that degree this year. I think they're going to look for potentially a bat that can fit the roster. Otherwise, they're just going to trust that the combination of Marte coming back with hopefully Jeff McNeil playing better, that's going to fill some of these gaps. Acuna as a possibility. I just don't think they're going to go all in for a blockbuster. But there are some players in division that could help the Mets where the prospect return would not be as large, or maybe a deal can get done. So I'm going to go through in-division trades in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online with their easy-to-use website, which is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. So maybe that's Francisco Lindor, his hits for the day, or his hits, runs, RBIs. You can find all those different stat projections for your favorite Mets or just players around baseball, as well as WNBA and so much more. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. Download Prize Picks today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB on the Prize Picks app for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. All right, here's our second subset of trade possibilities. We're looking in division, and the first target is Jazz Chisholm, who is 100% of the market. He is going to get dealt by the Miami Marlins. Would the Mets be interested? Well, Jazz Chisholm was a shortstop turned second baseman, now a center fielder. He does give you that second base outfield possibility. He has no experience playing right field, but on a contending team, he probably can do it. He's got a decently strong arm, not the strongest, but he can get by better than a Randy Arozarena, I think, just from an arm strength perspective. Less time in the outfield, but he's been playing center. Can he make that transition to right? I think it would be a little bit difficult, but you could always play him in center when Bader's not in there with a Tyrone Taylor or potentially a Starling Marte in right when he gets healthy. He makes some positional sense, I would say that. Here's some of my issues with it. The only thing he does well is barreling up baseballs, which is not a bad thing. That's a good trait to have. He's able to hit home runs, right? He has 11 home runs this year. Excuse me, he has 12 home runs. I was looking at our next guy who's got 11. On the year, he's hitting 249, 321 on base, 407 slug, 12 home runs, 18 stolen bases. He's a 102 WRC plus guy right now, so he's 2% better than your league average hitter. Jazz Chisholm has a better PR than he actually is. He's not as good of a player as you might think based on the coverage that he gets, the way he was on MLB The Show. He's good, not great. Okay, if you look at Baseball Savant, which gives us all this advanced data on a player, it'll tell us how hard they hit the baseball, what their expected batting average is, what their barrel percentage is, the bat speed, the walk percentage, all these different things. When you look at Jazz Chisholm, his expected slug, his barrel percentage, his bat speed, and his walk percentage, those specific stats are above average, but for most of them, it's just slightly. Barrel percentage is the only one where he's considerably above average. Every other metric you look at Baseball Savant, he is below 50% or below the 50 percentile mark. So he is below average in almost everything else. So strikeout rate, chase rate, whiff rate, all these different things. And he has not put together a complete great season in his career. Yes, there's some control there. I don't see it. The reason why I included him is because he is on the market for sure. And there is a world where the Mets trade for Jazz Chisholm and Tanner Scott, and you get another closer possibility and a left-handed arm. Tanner Scott, one of the best relievers on the market. You get a guy in Jazz Chisholm that would replace Jeff McNeil. And honestly, if the Mets were to make this trade, if I was going to mock it up, the way I would do it if I was Billy Epler is I would staple a bunch of money to Jeff McNeil, and I would send him to Miami in this trade. And the Marlins would be taking on a player that, yes, hasn't played well this year, but if he becomes let's just say for the next 2 years, he's gonna cost them like $4 million a season, and they eat that much money down, and they can bet on a guy that might bounce back and they can flip on a cheap contract. It becomes somewhat of an attractive asset to Miami, and you're sort of flipping your problems, really, if you're the Marlins and the Mets in that type of a trade. Here's the issue. Jazz Chisholm's not a good clubhouse guy either. So I just think you have such a good thing going right now to get a guy that's not a clear fit in right field. Yes, you could play him at second base, but I don't know if they should start anybody but Iglesias. Iglesias has been really good. And I think as much as Jeff McNeil seems to be this polarizing personality, because every time he gets out, he is slamming his helmet and throwing a tantrum a lot of times, I don't think that his teammates dislike him. When you see the teammates interact with Jeff, it doesn't come across like he is hated in that clubhouse. Maybe I'm misreading it. I'm sure other people are viewing it differently. But I see that Jeff McNeil was there when there was that first concert of OMG. You've seen a million since, but the first one at the charity event, Jeff McNeil was there. When Jeff McNeil hits that home run and he comes into the dugout, he hugs Jose Iglesias first. It feels like the guys would rally around Jeff, and there is still an upside to Jeff and the defensive versatility there. I just think to eat all that money to deal him just to get a guy in Jazz Chisholm that's not the clearest of upgrades doesn't make the most sense to me. Even if you kept Jeff and Jazz, well, now I don't know who's playing. To me, it's just not an ideal fit. I think Jazz Chisholm probably fits the Yankees a lot more than the Mets. All right, so now that's one option, but let's move over to Washington because there's two, Jesse Winker and Lane Thomas. And I've seen a lot of people sort of discussing Winker. Saw Metsmerize had an article about it today as a trade possibility. And it makes sense. If you're looking at the bats, he might be the best hitter available when it comes to this subset, right? 260 average this year, 374 on base, 432 slug, 11 home runs, 12 stolen bases. He's added that to his bag this year, 130 WRC plus. Here's the issue. Better versus righties and lefties. You already have Bader and Taylor that do exactly that. So doesn't necessarily fit. He's left-handed. The Nationals are shielding him from lefties at times. The Mets would need him to play against lefties. So if he's not going to play against lefties, well, now what's the fit? Okay, so great. He's going to start in right field until you get Marte back against right-handed pitching, and maybe him and Marte platoon when Marte's healthy. Fine, but Tyrone Taylor, if you just look at what he's done against right-handed pitching, which is not nearly what Jesse Winker's done, but then you combine the defensive aspect, I'm not sure how much of an upgrade Jesse Winker is, And he should have a pretty hot market this year. A lot of teams should like him. Teams that need him as a DH, maybe left fielder, maybe first baseman, but a guy that's just a lefty that you plug in the lineup. So I don't think he is a roster fit for the Mets. Lane Thomas makes the most sense. Maybe of any name we're going to talk about on the show today. He's basically Starling Marte light, or maybe just a young Starling Marte when it comes to function on this roster. Probably costs us more than Winker. There's an extra year of team control, but that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. He's one of the fastest guys in baseball, sneaky speed, got a strong arm. He has graded out at about average defensively in the past. This year hasn't been good. Both him and Jesse Winker have been -8 outs above average. Starling Marte, though, has also been bad defensively this year. He's a great base stealer, 23 stolen bases. He is terrible against right-handed pitching. Here's the thing. I think the problem with Lane Thomas is you're going to have to trade for an everyday player that probably is more of a platoon bat, because you look at his splits against left-handed pitching, 350 average, 430 on base, 550 slug. He's got a 175 WRC plus. So he's been 75% better than the league average hitter against left-handed pitching. 3 of his 8 home runs have come against lefties. 5 have come as a righty. Now with that, in his OPS, actually, I should also mention, 980 versus lefties, 610 versus righties. Against righties, he's hitting 210, 268 on base, 342 slug, 70 WRC plus. He is not good against right-handed pitching. So if you were to trade for him, I would hope that he's not going to all of a sudden start every day. And I think maybe giving him the occasional start with a favorable matchup against a righty makes sense. But ideally, he is going to platoon and be your starting right fielder when there's a lefty on the mound. Now, here's the issue. When Starling Marte comes back, 2 guys that are basically the same in function for the roster. I would like it, and I think if they did it, it would be because they have no faith in Marte coming back. And you also could, granted, roll out a lineup when you do have Marte back, if you had Thomas, where you would just bench both Bader and Taylor against lefties. You play Thomas in left, Marte in right, Nimmo in center. So that could work. If the Mets could get Kyle Finnegan and Lane Thomas in a trade, that would be a home run, and that would make your team a lot better. But for the prospect capital that it would take to get Lane Thomas, based on the market this year, and if they dangle him, I think they'll find a team that needs a bat desperately to play every day in the outfield that's going to pay more than I think the Mets would want to for a guy that I would believe would be more of a platoon bat for the Mets. I still don't think that one's likely. So as we've gone through this exercise, as we're going through every single team, and I tell you, I went through all 30 rosters, really. I mean, the ones that are not all 30, because obviously the Yankees aren't selling, the Orioles. All of the conceivable teams that are sellers or fringe teams that are in the middle. I went through, and this is what I came up with. So is there a trade fit at all for the Mets to add a bat? Maybe it'll take a reunion from a former Met coming back home. Can that be the answer to help this lineup to get another bat in that outfield? I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, or it brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. If eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP, bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. The MLB draft is officially over. The Mets have made all 20 of their selections, and today there will be a bonus edition of Locked On Mets where I'll break down the final 10 picks of the draft for the Mets, as well as spotlight my 5 favorite picks from the 3 days of the draft. So make sure you check that out. Also, you want to be a Locked On Mets insider because you get inside access to the show. So all the insiders today, as the picks came in, were getting subtext where they were seeing all the information that I had on the most recent Mets draftees. So if you want to be inside the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. Find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. When I was trying to find a fit for this team, I couldn't help but look at some Mets reunions that made a lot of sense. There are 4 former Mets outfielders that could be on the block this year that I think fit this roster because the package to get them would not be very steep. So I think they would be intriguing to the Mets from that lens, who could fit in right field. The first one is the best right fielder the Mets have produced over the past decade, Michael Conforto. Look, if you've listened to the show for a while, you know I love Michael Conforto. Any deadline, any free agent window when he's available, I'm going to try speaking into existence. I want to see Conforto back in a Mets uniform, and he's having a pretty good year. He's hitting 237, 310 on base, 438 slug, has 10 home runs, 39 RBIs in 73 games. Now, if you look at his season, he was scorching in April and May, and then he got hurt in May, had a hamstring strain. And that, I think, carried over into June, had really bad numbers in June. He has started to pull himself out of it in July, and Conforto can be a bit streaky. But if you look at the data behind his swing on Baseball Savant, things are still looking pretty red. He's still hitting the ball pretty hard, expecting batting average, expecting slug, these things. We're actually going to talk about those a little bit as we get to the next player on this list. So I think fans right now would prefer based on just the stats that they see. But when we get under the hood on these two guys, Conforto is a little bit better, but just as far as the fit, he's not the best defensive outfielder. He's been playing more left than right in San Francisco, but Michael Conforto knows right field and city as well as any player that's active right now in baseball. So I think in that sense, he'd fit like a glove. Still has a strong enough arm to play out there. You know he would fit in that clubhouse. He played with Pete Alonso, played with Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, a lot of these guys, even Francisco Lindor for a year in 2021. So I think he would come in, be a very laid-back, easygoing guy that could be your starting right fielder until Marte came back. If you wanted to platoon those guys, you could. Interestingly enough, though, he has been better against left-handed pitching this year. He's hitting 281, 339 on base, 474 slug. A little bit more of a limited amount of plate appearances, 57 at bats to get to those numbers. The Giants are platoon heavy. He has a 132 WRC plus against lefties. Against righties, 224 average, 302 on base, 427 slug, 107 WRC plus. And that's the neighborhood he's lived in, 107 to 115. He's been sort of the same guy since 2021, although there was a shoulder injury that kept him out for all of 2022. But then he put up identical numbers in 2023 to what he did in 2021, sort of trending towards the same season. But you have a guy that can leave the yard, can be an impact player potentially in the playoffs. I could see him getting hot at the right time and really doing some things for you. He's making a lot of money. So if the Giants really fall out of this by the deadline, maybe they would be a little bit more excited or interested in getting him off their books because he's going to be a free agent. Now, I don't think they're a team that will value just clearing money. They're going to want a prospect for Conforto because I think they really do appreciate having him. He is a really good clubhouse guy, but that's a deal that can get done where the Mets could have someone that could be a starting right fielder for you until you get Marte back and maybe even for the rest of the season. All right, so here's the other guy I wanted to compare him to, Kevin Pillar. I've seen a lot of Mets should get Kevin Pillar, rumblings on social media. And here's why. His numbers on the season look great. He had 17 bad games with the White Sox, but since going to the Angels in 45 games, 288 average, 340 on base, 42 slug, 6 home runs, 131 WRC plus, and he's been crushing lefties, 359 average, 406 on base, 625 slug, 188 WRC plus. He is 35 compared to Conforto at 31. Here's my issue. He was ridiculous in May. He hit 409. He has been hitting below the Mendoza line since May. So the numbers that you see for the season have been carried by a ridiculous May that was unsustainable. 5 of his 7 home runs came in May. Arm strength is still there. He can play all 3 outfield spots. Maybe the best fit defensively, but you look behind or look under the hood, as I said before. Compare his expected batting average to Conforto. Expected batting average for Pillar, 240. Conforto, 248. Expected slug for Kevin Pillar, 386. Michael Conforto, 471. Doesn't whiff or strike out a ton, so that's good, but he also doesn't walk. xWOBA is expected weighted on base average, and it's hard to really explain all the different things that factor into it, but essentially this is a stat that is like an on base percentage, but it's weighted based on how many extra base hits you have, how you're impacting the baseball, and expected is telling you what it should be. There's a WOBA, which is what it is, and expected WOBA, which is telling you what it should be. The bottom line here, if you look at expected WOBA, Kevin Pillar is at 304. Conforto is at 339. So the point is, if you're just boiling down the numbers to something as simple as this, Michael Conforto impacts the baseball much better than Kevin Pillar, and he's younger. You're going to get a much better shot at top-end performance from Conforto. Pillar probably wasted his one good month in May on the Angels. I don't know if he's going to have another one. Good clubhouse guy, too. Not a terrible fit. He's not going to cost a lot. If the Mets traded for Kevin Pillar, I don't hate it. But if I'm just talking about the bats that we're looking at here, I'm not as high on Pillar, especially when you look again at some of the other stats, the average exit velocity, the bat speed, the barrel percentage, the hard hit percentage. None of them are great. For Michael Conforto, his expected slug is in the 79th percentile, and he ranks in the 65th percentile or better in expected WOBA, expected slug, average exit velocity, bat speed, barrel percentage, hard hit percentage, and walk percentage. That's across Major League Baseball. So all the data tells us that Conforto is still an above average hitter. All the data tells us that Kevin Pillar is not. Two more for you. Guys that were traded by the Mets at last year's deadline. Tommy Pham and Mark Canha. Bring them home. Tommy Pham, I don't know if he would fit in the clubhouse. There's a lot of stuff said in the media. I really don't know if that's a fit. With that said, in a vacuum as a player, he makes some sense. He has not crushed lefties this year, but has about even splits between left-handed and right-handed pitching. It's just been the same guy. You look at his OPS, it was over 750 through May, been sub 650 ever since. So he has really slowed down. He's 36 years old. He's a decent outfielder. You can put him in right. He's not going to be great out there, but he's probably going to be better than Mark Canha. To me, I just don't see Pham coming back. Mark Canha is more interesting. He's playing through a hip injury. He's 35. He's got a noodle for an arm. Does not fit in right field. I'm telling you all the things that don't make sense, but here's the one that does. He's been crushing lefties this year. 286 average, 403 on base, 476 slug, 870 OPS, has a 145 WRC plus, so 45% better than your league average hitter against lefties. He's been bad against righties, 82 WRC plus, 618 OPS. The Tigers have stopped playing him against righties lately. The Mets could do the same thing. He would just start in right field until you get Starling Marte back and be just a good clubhouse vibes guy. And here's why this one makes sense. We're going to talk about it on tomorrow's show. I love the relievers that the Detroit Tigers have. And Mark Canha is a negative asset for a small market franchise right now. He's making $11 million this year as the club option on the Mets contract that they gave him, the 2-year deal with the club option. The Brewers picked up that option and then traded him to Detroit. The Mets could have him stapled into this trade. The fans loved Mark Canha. They would be on board. The clubhouse loved Mark Canha. They would be on board. He's a fifth outfielder. I don't think that this team needs much at the deadline when it comes to position players. I honestly believe that what they need more than anything else is a healthy Starling Marte. And if they don't get that, I have some faith that Jeff McNeil, as crazy as it is to still have faith in this guy, I have some faith that the Mets can win with a combination of Jeff McNeil and Tyrone Taylor in right field if they needed to. And I'm banking hard on Jose Iglesias at second base. But there's enough other options that the Mets have at their disposal that I'm comfortable riding with what they have. They can just lean defense. If you have Iglesias at second base and Tyrone Taylor in right field, you have more than enough defense. Bader in center, Nimmo in left. Your outfield defense is spectacular. Your infield defense with Vientos, who's been solid, but Lindor and Iglesias up the middle. And then late in games, as we've seen lately, sliding Iglesias to third with McNeil at second. It's a really good defensive club, and there's enough power on this team. There's enough offense with the 6 guys that are in there almost every day. And then the fact that Bader can absolutely be a 7 solid batting lineup. And again, if Iglesias maybe doesn't keep this up, but is 80% of this for the rest of the season, I think you're fine. So ultimately, the reason why, funny enough, Mark Canha in some ways makes the most sense out of everybody we've talked about today is because you don't have to trade significant prospects to get him. If anything, he's going to help you on the prospect side to get a Tigers reliever that can really solve the issue with this club. I don't know what they need a bat. I really don't. I love Michael Conforto back. I don't know if the Giants are going to trade him, to be honest. Tommy Pham doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Kevin Pillar, fine, but I don't think he's going to be an impact player. don't even necessarily know if I believe in Kevin Pillar that much more than Jeff McNeil offensively. He's been bad since that month of May. So again, as you go through it, I feel like the Mets are in a position where they might trade for a Tyler Naquin type acquisition. Remember the Mets got Naquin in 2022? Oh, what's he going to be? He can platoon with Canha. He didn't end up doing anything for the Mets. I think ultimately staying towards defense and just hoping that you get Starling Marte back for the playoffs. Because here's the thing. Starling Marte is a better fit for this roster than every single one of the 10 trade candidates that I put out there today. He's on the roster next year anyway. You're paying the man. He's got a cannon for an arm in right field, even though the defense isn't great. If he's just going to be a 6-inning player or 7-inning player, if Starling Marte is out there for the beginning of games and Taylor comes in for defense late, and Starling Marte gets the first 3 at-bats, crushes lefties, you can protect him with that knee by really platooning him heavy with Taylor down the stretch, and then just hoping you have a healthy Starling Marte for the playoffs, where I feel like he can be as ignitable as any of these outfield options. Marte is the guy that the Mets need more than anyone else. But of the 10 names that we talked about today, there are fits that would help this roster. Lane Thomas is the best facsimile to what Starling Marte gives you, what you're losing right now with Marte. Thomas would fit that void. I just don't know about cost. When it comes to the blockbusters, Randy Arozarena makes some sense, but the fit's not entirely there. Still my favorite of those blockbuster candidates. And when it comes to the reunions, Michael Conforto is the best player, I believe, to be your starting right fielder if you don't have faith that Marte is going to come back. And Mark Canha makes sense as a guy that would be a nice 5th outfielder for this team that could hit left-handed pitching and, take the first couple at bats of a game when you have a lefty on the mound. And then once the lefty's out, you put Tyrone Taylor in for defense. So that is my breakdown of the entire market when it comes to bats. There's not a lot. So don't get your hopes up that the Mets are going to add an outfielder of impact at this deadline. I think the most likely outcome is they stand pat. Tomorrow's show, though, is really where the Mets are going to make their bacon at this deadline. What are they going to do with the relief market? I have 5 teams that the Mets should be on the phone with to get some relief help. So we're going to go through a ton of different trade candidates on tomorrow's show. Make sure you don't miss it. Also, don't miss the bonus episode of today's show where I'm talking about the draft. I did 2 shows yesterday, one on Pete Alonso, another one on the draft. So you can find all of that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Trying to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season. So I appreciate all of you who subscribe. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube and on Amazon Fire TV.